and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're excited to talk about this program that we started at the Rogers Public Library during COVID. So we're going to talk about how we came up with the idea, how we implemented the idea, how it was received by our patrons, and some things that we learned along the way. We called it RPL Picks. Let us pick your next read. And so we're going to learn about that. But first, we're going to introduce everybody. You're going to hear a few voices today. One of them will be Nelwyn Anderson. She's the head of technical services and was important in putting it in the catalog. Jess Whitehead, who's the interlibrary loan librarian. She's in charge of borrowing items and ideas. Tamara Sipes, that's me, the information literacy librarian, and Autumn Weiss, who is in charge of reserves and curbside pickup. So we're just going to learn, what are RPL Picks? So this is a project that we picked up during COVID. We used it as a way to connect and meet with the needs of our patrons while they could not come into the building. This program was well received by our patrons and was a promising example of ingenuity and collaboration in our library. So we're here to share the concept and the story of its development with you today. You might be thinking, what are RPL Picks? It may not be familiar, but the idea may be similar to things you've heard at other libraries and things that they've been doing in the past 2 years or even before that. Other libraries have blind date with a book and recommendation forms for their patrons to fill out. But this was a way of creating a new service to fit the needs of our patrons and our staff as well as possible. And why did we do it? We were partially closed due to COVID. Many patrons couldn't come in to browse even when we were partially open, and our shelves were completely full. So we were trying to figure out a way to get the books to the patrons because they really wanted to get some reading. So if you're wondering how we did it, you're going to learn in this little video, and hopefully you can implement this at your library or have a general idea of how we did it. So now we're going to go to the concept development. I'm going to hand this over to Jess.
Hi there. So when we got this idea, we had a couple of problems that we were trying to figure out how to handle. One of the problems was our shelves were absolutely full because people were not able to check things out as much as normal. And also our circulation numbers were low because we had been closed. And we also were trying to connect with some of our patrons. We missed our regular patrons. They missed us. Several people had emailed me directly asking about how would they get books during this time when we were closed. We had actually even kind of snuck around and checked out books to a few people when we weren't technically open because we wanted people to have access to the library, and the people who loved us so much, we thought they deserved books, and especially some of our elderly patrons who were unable to come in even when we were open by appointment. So I was snooping around on an ALA Connect thread, and I saw that a bunch of libraries were trying to figure out ways to get books into the hands of their patrons, and they were having some different ideas about how to do that. So we've had a couple of different programs in the past that we thought could possibly work for this. One of the things that we had done for a long time is called Fun with Reading Kits, and that's a program for parents to check out books for kids while they go on vacation or something like that. They fill out a form and we fill up a bag with a bunch of random stuff. We also have book club kits where you get multiple copies of a book and questions and things like that, and it checks out as one item, and that is for adults. So we thought maybe something somewhere in between those two ideas would work for this. So the next thing that we decided to do was Autumn and I basically were talking about this, and we were brainstorming. We were standing in the hallway, and then we started talking to Tamara. Autumn made a list because that's what Autumn does. And then as we were discussing this, we decided, okay, we're making this too complicated already. We need to make it simple. And then Nelwyn stuck her head in and said, no, it can't be that simple. We have to figure out a way so we can do this in the catalog. So you can see our notes. There's a lot of things scratched out. We started over several times. We played around with the name. We played around with different topics that we could do. Do you want to add to that list there, to this discussion, Autumn? Because we were having this whole conversation.
Yeah, that impromptu hallway meeting that occurred, I had created this list of possible genres that we could have for this. And then in the hallway, I had printed it out and we were just sort of talking through them. And as people kept joining the conversation, things kept changing. And we decided, oh, you know, maybe we shouldn't do this or we should do that, or maybe it can be called this or that. How do we spell the word juvenile? And I really just like this document. That's why I have it scanned, because it shows like how messy this process can be, and like how many things get added and taken away, and how many new ideas come in with different people coming into the conversation. I think it's a great physical representation of us trying to reason through this new project together. And now we're going to throw it over to Nelwyn, who actually made this possible.
So Jess kind of already mentioned how before we could actually do anything with it, we had to decide how it can go into the OPAC, which means go into our catalog, so that our patrons can actually use it. You can't just say, hey, let's do this, and not have a way for them to access it. So we first touched upon the fun with reading bags, and we thought at first, well, maybe they check out a bag, we check out the books and do it that way. Then we thought that may be a little too complicated, and also hopefully people in children's would be using it. Then we thought, because then we also have the book club bag kits, and so we had this kind of idea of a bigger whole, W-H-O-L-E, whole. And so we thought we use that, and taking the genres that we kind of whittled down, because yes, genres are kind of difficult and you have subgenres and all of that. I didn't really have to create a type. We just said books, or I think we have some audiobooks and that kind of thing. And I just used that type, and I started working with the title. The title is whatever that genre is. So all of them are RPL Picks plus whatever the genre is. And then whenever you have a catalog entry, you want a summary or description. And Autumn helped, and actually various people helped, but Autumn was one of the larger helps with the coming up with the description that was genre specific. And then we had every single one of them had in there the kind of disclaimer, or the, if you want more specific, please contact us. Because we do want to get them the specifics that they really want, because that's part of our job at the library. Each one has, if there's a genre, then we had the genre subject heading. We tried to link out as much as possible so that they could also, if they were wanting to find books on their own, they could do that. We also had to decide, well, how many of these can they put on hold, because they could actually put them on hold so that Autumn, when she went to look at holds, could go and start filling them. It's like one less step we had to put on our patrons. We also had to decide, do they get 2? Do they get 5? How many do they put on hold? How many do they actually get when they're checking out? That wasn't how many they got when they checked out wasn't so much on in the catalog, but it was part of our creation of these particular items, so that whoever, if it's not just Autumn, if it's anybody has to go fill them, they knew how many to select. And what you did is you put a hold on it, so the patron could put a hold on it, and we created that. They never checked out, but in our system, to put something on hold and make it easier, we do have to put a barcode on it. That's why the previous slide, if you'll go back, does have those barcodes. That's just how our system works, and it just made it a little easier. That way patrons weren't looking at it seeing, oh, it's on order, because that could get confusing. And then I had my lovely, one of our pretty much our graphics designer here in-house create the dust jackets, and I think that might be mentioned later with marketing. So we've made those so that we had a sort of consistent look And each one will have RPL picks for a subject heading as well, so that if they're curious to see what other genres we might have, they just click on it. And that's how it's pretty much to make sure that our patrons know what they're getting and make it a little easier on them. And then we'll let Autumn discuss more stuff.
So now that patrons could actually place holds on the RPL picks in the system, we had to figure out how we were actually going to fill those holds. Our circulation staff usually processes holds throughout the day. It's usually me, Autumn, but other people do this also, depending on how busy we are. And we usually run a list that has items on it. We go and grab them, check them out to the patron, and they're ready to go. So these were a little bit different because we didn't know exactly what to pull. We sort of had to process through how we were going to use this new thing. Added to that was the fact that curbside pickup was very new to us. And our ILS was pretty new to us. So we had to work through some extra issues as we figured out how we were going to make this work in our library. So like, for example, Nelwyn mentioned this, our ILS requires us to have a barcode attached to the item. So we had to make items with barcodes. Patrons placed holds on them. And the way that we send a notice in our system, we have to have something to like scan to send that notice. And then we have to actually check it out to them to clear it. So we had to work through several steps of how are we going to make it clear to the system what we're doing and how do we make it function the way that we want it to function, which is probably a issue that you are all familiar with as well. So working through those was a kind of difficult, but we did it through some testing and troubleshooting. We also had to think through like, how will these reserves be different than our regular holds? We were having to work around our own system in several ways, but we also had to consider how we were going to pull these items. Like I said, with normal holds, we know exactly what a patron wants, and all we have to do is go find it on the shelf. To select RPL picks for a patron, we needed to put some extra thought into what we were pulling for them. So that means that sometimes we would split up lists between people pulling regular holds and someone else going to search for RPL picks. So how did we select the books that we sent out for RPL picks? We figured out pretty early on that just randomly selecting the books was not quite as easy as we anticipated. One of our goals was to make the selection of these quick and easy. So that's why if you notice all of the categories that we set up, all the genres are aligned with stickers that we use in our library already. So that people could just go out, browse for our patron whenever they can't browse for themselves. And even if they don't have great knowledge of that genre, they can just grab things and sort of shop for someone else based on pretty simple directions. Some research was still needed though, to make sure we were giving our patrons a really good selection. So we set up this as parameters for the people pulling these books. This was, again, mostly circulation is filling these. So whenever I would send someone out to go pull, I would recommend these as sort of guidelines. We wanted this to be a sampling of the genre. So we wanted to give people a good array of books. So if a patron reserved a mystery, RPL Picks mystery, we would try to get like a cozy mystery, a spy mystery, a murder mystery, not just all cozy mystery, which for all we know, they could hate. So we were trying to give them a good sampling of the genre. We also were trying to avoid sequels. We really wanted to get patrons into the first step of a series. We love starting people on new series. But it's really underwhelming to open a package and find the second book in a series that you haven't started yet. So that was one of the basic rules, was that if we're pulling a series, you always need the first book, which honestly can sometimes be sort of hard to figure out if you're just in the stacks pulling books for someone.
That was the hardest part for me.
Yeah, I usually went out with my phone and I would type in like first in series. Also, one of our goals became, this was not an initial goal, but we did eventually build to this, that we wanted to recognize and challenge our regular patrons. So some patrons started choosing RPL Picks pretty regularly. There were some names that came through over and over and over again. And we got pretty familiar with those people and the things that they liked and the things that they disliked. And it allowed us to go out into the stacks with some extra knowledge. That, for example, this person asked for mystery books, but we know that they like the mean mystery books with like bad murder. So it allowed us to push and challenge those people as well. Because, for example, the same person had already read through all of our new mystery books. So we were able to talk to her about the possibility of maybe reaching into like some YA mysteries. And so that was very interesting. Or, for example, we knew another patron preferred large print, but he had read through all of our new large print titles. And we were trying so hard not to repeat the things that we were giving them over and over again. So we went through our stacks and specifically opened each book to look at the font, and they were our regular print books, but anything that had a larger font, we were like, oh yeah, maybe this would be a good fit for him. So it really allowed us to get to know some of those patrons and what their reading goals were, and also to challenge them to try some new things. We also wanted to avoid becoming readers advisory. It's a service that our library is always willing to offer to people, but we just didn't have the time or ability to do that with the popularity of curbside orders and our being mostly closed to the public. So that was sort of, we needed to keep that as a separate service that a different department or person could handle, because we were already pretty much overrun. We wanted the picks to be good and to fit the person that we were giving them to, but we couldn't make them completely personalized. So to make sure that patrons knew they still had access to this service, we did mention readers advisory in the item description. So if they put it on reserve for themselves, they saw that it was an option to contact us to talk through other things. And we also started up a regular Facebook post that's a What to Read Wednesday, where they can get on and talk to a reader's advisory librarian. It was not as widely used as RPL Picks was, but it is good to have it, I think, as an option for people.
I think it's also worth mentioning that many of the patrons that used RPL Picks over and over also would place holds on specific items while this was going on. So if they knew that John Grisham had a new book out, they would place a hold on that and then also ask for RPL Picks mysteries at the same time.
And now we're going to go with the marketing. This is Tamara again. So we had this idea ready to go. We thought we figured out all of the core issues that might come up. So we were ready to start telling our patrons about it. As Nelwyn mentioned before, we had our in-house graphics designer, Samantha, make those dust jackets, which were perfect for that little image in the OPAC and in the catalog. And so we used that as just like, this is the RPL Picks look. This is the vibe that we're going with. Samantha was not here the weekend that we were ready to go. We didn't want to wait. We wanted to go ahead and just get it out there. So I jumped into Canva, that top picture right there. That's just kind of what I used. It's not the font that we typically would have used for the RPL Picks, but I tried to get the colors as much as possible, as close as possible to the ones in the dust jacket. And then it was ready to go. And that was our very first social media post on Facebook and Instagram. And then the second post below with the little book cart is what Samantha created, which looks a lot cuter. So this is the image that we continue to use throughout the pandemic, and we even have it now. So what we did, not only on social media, posting it back and forth, but we printed out some quarter sheets and stuffed them in our curbside orders, especially those patrons that just kept calling us and saying that they don't know what to pick out, or people just asking for different books. So we wanted to know that that option was available. So then these are just a couple of Facebook posts that we created to show what we had to offer for our RPL Picks and Flicks. And as Autumn mentioned, selecting the RPL Picks, we wanted it to be quick and easy. So we kind of had the same idea with the RPL Picks Facebook posts. We just gathered up some books, made sure that the spines, they're easy to read, and that the pictures looked nice. And we tried to make sure that the spines were facing out. It took 10 minutes at most, and most of that was just gathering up books that we thought looked good and just kind of angling to where there weren't any glares on the covers, and took the snapshot, uploaded it. We created a bit.ly link to continue to go back to the RPL Picks in the catalog, and we also made a blog post about them. And this is just a couple other Facebook posts that we did. The one with our mascot, Roger Penguin, that's one of the last ones we did regarding curbside pickup, because on May 4th, 2021, we raised our curbside pickup item limit to 10 items. Previously, it was 5. RPL Picks and Flicks, which we'll get to that, was counted as single items, which we believed helped the program succeed, especially with our avid readers. And then on June 1st, 2021, the library opened without requiring appointments. So we believe that the RPL Picks kind of dropped off a little bit when we stopped doing appointments, but we are still getting people to use it. We probably could advertise it a little more, especially right now with school picking up and things like that. But now we're going to talk about how successful it was.
Okay, so we did all of this work. We made the catalog entries. We figured out how to fill them. We did all the marketing. Did it work? Did the patrons use the service that we worked so hard to build for them? And yeah, they did. In 2020, these are some numbers. We're going to talk through some stats. In 2020, our first month, we had 18 RPL picks that were requested and filled. And now that is also, we didn't officially start until August 8th. So that's in 1 month, we had 18 orders to fill, which is pretty good by our standards, especially for a new program, and especially during the pandemic. Our second month, we were still going strong with 25 orders for the whole month. And then from August to December in 2020, we had 99 total orders. So they were going pretty steady. We were getting some really good response from them, which we'll talk about in a minute. But overall, pretty good for us. In 2021, we continued with really steady orders through May. But then, as Tamara said, in June, we reopened fully to the public, our normal hours, no appointments. And the requests for RPL picks have dropped off significantly since then, which is evidence that people were using this as a browsing service while they couldn't come in or they chose not to come in. So it has gone down, but still fairly steady through 2021. Some of this data also gave us some insight into our patrons and their browsing habits. Some categories were much more popular than others, revealing some information about what our patrons are interested in and what they're the most willing to experiment with. By far, the most popular category was new fiction, making up 33.6% of all of the orders. In my mind, this makes sense because our new arrival section is often the most popular, and people want to keep up with whatever is new, sort of regardless of what it is in general. Our second highest category was mystery, which also makes sense because it's a very popular genre with our patrons. And of course, these are people who like mysteries. So they already want to be surprised by their books. So us surprising them with more books just sounds great to them, I guess. These were by far the most popular categories. Picture books and general fiction were the other two largest categories, but still quite a bit smaller. And all the other categories of all the other ones that we made only made up 13% of our total orders. So this information might help you. It might align with what you think some of your patrons would like. It does sort of help us realize what our patrons' major interests are.
So we did try to keep track a little bit of some of the responses that we got from our patrons. And this really made us feel good because during COVID, boy, there were times when everybody was not feeling that great. So it really would make our day to get some positive feedback from our patrons. We have all the numbers that showed we were doing pretty good. So we thought that was great. But when somebody says something specific, it just feels that much better to us. So there's some of the things they said here that they liked the picks, they enjoyed the service. We had people call and just say, thank you for offering it. I know a lot of the patrons email me because I've worked here forever. And I do the interlibrary loans, and I also do a lot of regular holds. I used to run our bestsellers club. So I have pretty regular contact with a lot of people. And I just got so many great responses from people saying how much they appreciated it. And then when they were able to come back in, when we were open normally and people were feeling a little safer in the world, many of those people would come up to the counter when they were ready to check out and say, the RPL Picks was a great thing to have when you were closed. So we count that as a big success.
Mm-hmm. It was also, for us, the patrons really liked it, but we also liked filling them.
It was fun.
It was fun to pull the books and sort of like go shopping for our patrons. And it was also fun to see people come back for the sequel in a series that you had given them the first step of, or seeing your coworkers really get into their own genre and oh, she really loves romance, so let's let her go pick the romance books, was really a fun experience for us too.
And you always, when someone comes to the counter and they're holding a book that you like, we always say, oh, I love that book, or, oh, if you like this, you might like blah, blah, blah. So this was a way that we could still continue to have that kind of connection with people, even if we did not see them in person. So with everything, of course, we discovered that there were more complications once we actually started going through the RPL picks and processing them for our patrons. So one of the big issues that we had, we didn't want to give people the same books over and over. And some of our patrons, two specific patrons, were really heavy users of RPL picks, and they're two of our favorite folks. And we didn't want to give them the same books over and over because that would be disappointing to them. So again, we didn't want to make things overly complicated. We wanted this to be as easy for us as possible, as well as making it a good experience for the patrons. So what we ended up doing was just making a real quick spreadsheet, and we would just scan all those titles in real quick for the people that used RPL picks over and over. That way we could just look at that spreadsheet and say, oh, nope, I guess Autumn gave him this book last week, so I won't give it to him again this week. But then we also were thinking about how could we meet some special requests without making this truly a reader advisory service. So I think Autumn talked a little bit before about the patron that preferred large print, and we would just kind of flip through some of the books and make sure that the font was a little bit larger. We also would have some people make a sort of specific request, like they would request RPL Picks nonfiction, but they want true crime nonfiction, or they want American history nonfiction. So we definitely filled those kinds of requests as well. And then a lot of people would call during this time and say, I just want some books. And we'd say, well, what kind of books do you want? And they would say something along the lines of, I don't care. But then they would also say that they really liked inspirational fiction. So we would do a general fiction, but give them a couple of inspirational fiction books. So we tried to make it as specific as possible without making it overly complicated for any of us.
Oh, I guess it's me now. My department also purchased the adult films, the adult DVDs, and
DVDs for grown-ups.
yes, there you go. I mean, some of them are kind of adult, but anyway, we thought also people might want to do the same thing for films. And we decided, once we saw that RPL Picks was working, we came up with a way to do RPL Flicks. We had fewer checkouts. We allowed fewer DVDs to go out with this particular thing, but we came up with the genres. We had the same descriptions. We linked it to other movies through subject headings and all of that. It was used to some level, but it wasn't quite as used as our books. And I think even audiobooks wasn't used as much. So it's pretty much people looking for books, because once we opened the library up, people were definitely checking out more DVDs. So like Autumn said earlier, the numbers pretty much told us, yes, people were using it as a browsing system, and movies tend to be slightly more personal. I don't think this was a failure exactly, but I do think that if we had been closed longer, it might have been used more, or it just simply tells us, yay, we have good movies, because they are checking out our DVDs now. It's just films tend to be more personal. So I think that's pretty much what that proved.
We did get a lot of requests during the last year and a half for specific movies. So it's not that people were not checking out movies. They just were doing browsing online on our catalog.
So where are they now? So RPL Picks is still around. We're still filling some of those for some people, like Jess mentioned, 2 specific patrons who used our RPL Picks over and over again. They're still using that. We still have people doing picture books and some of our other top genres, but they look a little different. We've reopened to our normal hours, so this option is less widely used. We're still keeping it, especially as an alternative for our homebound patrons, or just for people to say, I want some books. I don't care what they are. I just want to read something. And what did we gain? We learned that we could stretch ourselves and our knowledge to meet our patrons' needs in new ways, which, as you probably know, is kind of difficult during COVID. And it was a great way for us to connect with and get to know our patrons when we couldn't see them face to face. So we learned that we can work together and kick butt when we do. This process of RPL Picks moved quicker than almost anything else that we've come up with. We have a great crew, and we especially learned during COVID that everybody has ideas and we can all brainstorm really well. But this RPL Picks went through really quickly. The concept was developed on July 21st, and we were filling orders by August 8th, which is a huge quick turnover. This was an interdepartmental effort that went really smooth. And because it was an interdepartmental effort, the concept of filling orders came from circulation and reference, and then the marketing and cataloging came from reference and tech services. And it gives us hope that future efforts at this library will hopefully wind up the same way, quicken, get things out to our patrons. And it serves as a great example of people with different knowledge bases working together to fill in the gaps for each other. Because while we were standing in that hallway bouncing ideas off of each other, we were all thinking of different ways that it could go awry and trying to think of how we could prevent that from happening. And then, of course, we had to check with Nolan to make sure that this could be a thing that we could do. And So before we close, if you have any questions, we do have someone here to try and answer them. If you have any additional questions, you can email us and feel free to reach out to us at these emails here. And once again, thank you for attending. We hope you kind of learned a little bit of what Rogers Public Library did during the pandemic, and maybe you guys can implement this yourselves. So that's it. This is Tamara Sipes, the Information Literacy Librarian.
I'm Autumn.
I'm Jess.
And this is Nellwood Anderson.
Signing off.